Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. Now, I have made a couple of questions videos. I've made even more of me responding to questions. Some people may think it's easier to ask questions than to answer questions, depending on context of course. For my patrons, I have several videos out where I talk about some arguments against God. They are useful for anyone looking to push back on God claims with counter-evidence. Well, imagine my surprise when I happened upon a video done by a channel I have looked into before for potential content called Redeemed Zoomer. A number of months ago, I started a script for one of his videos, but stopped after I realized it was a bit nothing, and it wasn't going to waste my time. But this one shows promise. It is titled, All Atheists' Arguments Answered in 10 Minutes. All of our arguments? I doubt that. Maybe, though, he has good responses to inconsistent revelations, divine hiddenness, or at least the problem of evil, right? Your task today is to pause the video and write in the comments which arguments you expect he will either not attempt to answer or will be so far off the mark that he will actually convince more people to be atheists. Then, at the end, respond saying whether he actually had a good response or not. Take a moment. I'm not going anywhere. Got your arguments locked in? Good. Let's see what our Zoomer has to say today.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years. So let's answer them.
Is that so?
Hello, Pot. My name is Kettle. You're black.
But really, you think there have been no new arguments for the past 2,000 years? J.D. Schellenberg developed the argument from divine hiddenness, which was published in 1993. Now, one could argue that the first philosopher to write on this theme was Anselm of Canterbury, who wrote something on it in his Prologion in 1078. So, even at best, you're off by over 1,000 years. The earliest source I could find for the argument from inconsistent revelations seems to be Voltaire's Candide in 1759. And one more. I'm not going to do this all day, though I could. The outsider test of faith was first proposed by John Loftus in his 2013 book, The Outsider Test for Faith, How to Know Which Religion is True. But wait a minute, I hear you say. What did he actually say about 2,000 years?
But they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years.
He is just saying that the church has had answers for whatever arguments atheists have come up with for the past 2,000 years. The problem with this is that it is so vague that it is meaningless. It doesn't matter if there's an answer. It doesn't make it a good answer. It doesn't make it a correct answer. Anything I say could be answered by something in a 2,000-year-old book. That doesn't make the book correct. I could say, the Odyssey has answers to any argument religion has, and then just interpret a line from the book to mean something relevant, and there, an answer. Let me try it. Let me bring up a random question that a religious person could ask pertaining to some religious idea. Let's take the idea of suffering. Ah, how shameless! The way these mortals blame the gods. From us alone, they say, come all their miseries, yes, but they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share. What about being thy brother's keeper, or the idea of working to keep the peace, or about divine justice? But the god of earthquakes reassured the smith, Look, Hephaestus, if Ares scuttles off and away, squirming out of his debt, I'll pay the fine myself. So I could just as easily say that the Odyssey has answers for those questions long before the New Testament and most of the Old Testament was ever written. So what does that tell us? Nothing at all. So I don't care if you have a response to every single argument. That doesn't mean it is a good response, nor that anyone should accept your response. The idea that you think there is an answer is vacuous.
Religion causes wars. Well, actually, only 7% of all human wars were caused by religion, and if you remove Islamic wars, that number drops down to 3%.
I went looking to the actual source for this. So, according to the Encyclopedia of Wars, quote, wars have always arisen and arise today from territorial disputes, military rivalries, conflicts of ethnicity, and strivings for commercial and economic advantage, and they have always depended on, and depend on today, pride, prejudice, coercion, envy, cupidity, competitiveness, and a sense of injustice. But for much of the world before the 17th century, these reasons for war were explained and justified, at least for the participants, by religion, end quote. So even if I were to grant that they weren't religious in nature, they were definitely justified by religion. So I don't agree with Zoomer's claim here, and even his own source where his numbers come from don't either. So this isn't an acceptable answer.
A lot of evil has been done in the name of religion. This is true, but the most murderous people in human history have been atheists. This doesn't mean religion is true, it just means you can't use that as an argument against it.
Even if I grant your point, so what? Evil is not the same thing as murder. There are other evil actions besides murder, and in some cases, murder may not even be evil. Murder is simply the unlawful killing of another human being. In some circumstance, killing a human may be lawful or unlawful depending on where you are. What you consider murder, I may not consider murder. But I will move past the fact that you didn't address the actual argument, but decided to focus on one aspect of the content without addressing the myriad of other issues. What you're doing here is committing the tu quoque fallacy. What you're saying here is, yeah, religious people do evil, but so do atheists. It doesn't negate the original point that people can do harm in the name of religion. Both claims could be independently examined and assessed for their validity rather than dismissing one based on the shortcomings of the other. So he didn't actually answer this argument. All he did was make a demonstrably fallacious response, which I have a feeling will happen a lot with this guy. I could go into the fact that while some historical figures who committed atrocities may have identified as atheists, it doesn't mean that their actions were directly caused by their lack of belief in gods. Various complex factors contribute to human behavior, including political, economic, and social conditions. I could explain that atheism itself is not an ideology or a belief system that prescribes a particular set of morals or values. Atheists can hold a wide range of ethical and moral perspectives. In contrast, religious ideologies can vary greatly, and people may use religious beliefs to justify both benevolent and harmful actions. I could extend an olive branch and say that historical events are complex and multifaceted. Attributing the actions of individuals or regimes solely to their religious or non-religious beliefs oversimplifies the complex historical, political, and socioeconomic factors at play. Many conflicts have deep-rooted causes beyond religious or atheistic differences. I could easily point out that the majority of atheists do not engage in violence or support harmful ideologies. Many atheists, like religious individuals, seek peace, justice, and ethical behavior based on secular moral frameworks. I could also highlight the existence of secular moral frameworks such as secular humanism, which prioritize reason, ethics, and compassion without relying on religious beliefs. Many atheists adhere to these humanistic principles. Lastly on this, I want to point out this in the corner. No, again, even what seems to be his own source doesn't conclusively say so, and in fact provides harsh evidence against this. I'll grant the other two examples used here, but I will not grant this one. He did not claim to be an atheist, and he did not like atheists. So this is not an acceptable answer. 0 for 2, Zoomer. Not starting off very good, are you?
If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped by their context.
Yeah, maybe, but that doesn't actually address the argument at all. This is another tu quoque fallacy. The response doesn't address the point directly, but attempts to deflect by suggesting a similar situation for the other person. It doesn't invalidate or address the initial claim, but instead implies a form of, "you're just as guilty," without engaging with the substance of the argument. 0 for 3.
How do you know which religion is true? Well, everyone, religious or not, has faith in a certain worldview.
I had to interrupt here and say that I don't have faith in a worldview the same way Zoomer has faith in his God. This is dangerously close to an equivocation fallacy. Besides, what does the idea that we have something like faith in a worldview have to do with how we know which religion is true? Maybe he'll explain it.
It's just that some worldviews are called religions and some are secular, but everyone has to ask the question of which worldview best explains the world.
I don't necessarily agree, but I think the explanation is fine as an answer for a different question. It seems he was trying to say that we just come up with an answer that we think best explains the world, and for him, that's his religion. Of course, this is not an answer to the on-screen question, how do you determine which religion is true? The question, how we determine whether or not something is true, is not the same as what is your worldview. This is, however, the closest to an answer he's given so far, but I had to read so far into it to make his argument for him that I'm not giving any points for this. 0 for 4.
There's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world, so science can neither prove nor disprove God.
Looks like I get to ask my favorite question. If something has no effect on the natural world, what is the difference between that and something that doesn't exist? However, he does actually answer the question. The problem is that he makes the point for atheism. He confirms that God does not exist in the natural world. Something that doesn't exist in the natural world cannot have an impact on the natural world. Therefore, God doesn't have an impact on the natural world, meaning he's indistinguishable from something that doesn't exist. This is also an attempt to define a God into existence. What is the justification for this assertion of the definition? So while I would give him a point for actually answering the question, I should give him negative points for answering the atheist argument in support of atheism. So he would be -1 for 5, but let's just keep him at 0.
There's no evidence of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with near-death experiences getting information they never had access to.
I had hope that this video would not be so cringeworthy. He's literally arguing that there are medically documented cases of demonic possession. How is that even diagnosed? Is that put in someone's medical history? Let's see, history of high blood pressure, mild eating disorder, family has a history of cancer, one time possessed and controlled psychically by the Dark Lord Satan, mild fever. But I want to be fair. If there are medically documented cases of demonic possession, where would they be documented? Perhaps the Mayo Clinic has some information on them. Nope, 0 results. Okay, how about Johns Hopkins? Wait, really? Let's see what's... Oh, this is about psychedelic use and mental disorders. I checked out some of these and nowhere does it mention demonic or possessions anywhere. So nope, false alarm. I have not found a single published medical journal with demonic possessions listed as an actual cause for anything. In modern medicine and psychology, abnormal behaviors or conditions that might have once been attributed to demonic possession are now understood and treated through the lens of mental health and neurobiology. Conditions such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, dissociative disorders, and various neurological or psychiatric disorders can sometimes lead to behaviors that were historically associated with possession. As for the book there, Richard Gallagher, MD, is an actual psychiatrist with a private practice. With some digging, I found he has an actual degree and went to top schools. So he wrote a book, but he must have papers published on the topic, right? Well, he has a total of 5 published papers, according to ResearchGate, with his latest being from 1995. I'll put them on screen here so you can see that none of them mention demonic possessions as an explanation for anything. So he did write a book, and he seems to be a lecturer in New York at St. Joseph's Seminary and College. The information of what he's doing is now scattered, but the fact that this guy has a practice and can see patients is quite worrisome. So no medical articles exist showing the validity of demonic possession. I'm not even going to bother with his other 2 points, because even if I grant the point that we don't know how they know the information, it doesn't even imply that the supernatural could be a cause. Before you can assert the supernatural has a potential to be a candidate for a currently unknown cause, you have to show it exists. 0 for 6.
The Bible has contradictions. Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years? Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
Just like how every confusing plot twist in a soap opera can be explained with a little understanding of daytime drama. It's all about divine plot twists and spiritual character development, really. This is post hoc rationalization at its finest. If there appears to be a contradiction, it can be explained by changing the meaning of something to mean something else. There is no way to determine in the Bible what should be taken literally and what is allegory or metaphor. People used to take the Bible entirely literally, and there are still some today, but these are fewer and far between. When we see something that is demonstrably false, Christians have to change the meaning from literal to allegorical in order to try to justify why this incorrect passage is actually correct, but we're just reading it wrong. These people assume the Bible is true and do back-breaking gymnastics to try to keep it that way, rather than just admitting that maybe these Iron Age men don't have knowledge that we have today. And we're just trying their best to make sense of things at best and manipulating people for their own gain at worst. 0 for 7.
The Gospels were anonymous. Okay, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
This may be true, but that does mean we don't know who actually wrote them. And to express that we have early church fathers who claim that they knew who wrote the Gospels is not conclusive at all. Papias, an early Christian bishop and writer, is often cited in discussions about the authorship of the Gospels. He mentioned Mark as the interpreter of Peter and claimed that Matthew compiled sayings of Jesus in Hebrew. However, his statements are somewhat ambiguous and have led to various interpretations. The point of saying the Gospels are anonymous is multifaceted. Chiefly, recognizing the Gospels as anonymous texts can influence how scholars and readers interpret them. It may lead to a focus on understanding the communities and theological concerns that shape the narratives rather than assuming a direct link to the apostles or eyewitnesses. We don't know who wrote the Gospels, and if they were not written by people who actually knew this Mr. Jesus, then how much stock do you think historians are willing to put into them? How much stock should you put into them if this were the case? Anonymous means that the identity of the person who actually wrote them is unknown. That is different from saying we have no idea who wrote them. We have suspicions, sure, but you don't actually know if the persons you think did wrote the books or not. Your guess holds the same weight as having no idea. 0 for 8 now.
The Gospels misquote Jesus. Now, it's true that a lot of secular scholars think the Gospels are a mix of real quotes from the historical Jesus and fake quotes added by the church, but none of them can agree on which quotes are legit and which are not, so we can discard their opinions.
Again, not answering the question, but instead literally hand-waving this argument away. You can discard the opinions of secular historians because they don't agree on which quotes were legitimately from Mr. Jesus? So when religious historians also don't agree on which quotes were legitimate, does that mean you can discard their opinions too? I guess you discard literally every historian's opinion, so I can discard your response. 0 for 9.
Jesus never claimed to be God. Yes, he did. He didn't say, "I am God, worship me," but he showed that he was God in many places in all 4 Gospels by doing things that only God can do. It's true that he didn't walk around before his resurrection claiming to be God, because he wanted people to figure it out themselves. That's why he kept saying, "Who do you say that I am?" However, after his resurrection, people figured out that he was God, and Jesus congratulated them.
I can grant this, but you have to take it into account that there are characters in the book that absolutely knew whether or not Mr. Jesus was God or not. Take your fictional Satan, the one that apparently causes possessions. Apparently, in Matthew 4, he very clearly knew they were separate entities.
Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All of this I will give to you," he said, "if you bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve him only.'"
Now, if Satan knew that Mr. Jesus was God, then why did he try to offer Mr. Jesus the world that he already owned? Your answer is disputed. But you know what? I'm feeling generous. This bad argument by your atheist was technically answered in a way, so 1 point for you. The first actual point from an argument that basically no serious atheist uses. 1 point out of 10.
The later one of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels, so that breaks your pattern.
Sure, I'll grant this one. It is a pretty bad argument that, honestly, I've never heard. Though I have a few responses to Zoomer's portion here. It is far more likely that Paul has something like epilepsy and like seizures and potentially schizophrenia, meaning that it is no surprise that he would write about high Christology. Of course, Paul never knew Mr. Jesus while he was alive. The argument you seem to be trying to make earlier is that the authors of the Gospels did have some sort of relationship with Mr. Jesus before he died. So these people would have known the person of Mr. Jesus, and thus were more likely to write about him as they knew him, while Paul only knew of him through stories and visions, assuming that even happened at all. So while it was a bad argument to begin with, this one was technically answered. So now 2 out of 11.
The Bible supports slavery. No, it doesn't. Just because there's slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it.
While it is true that simply because something is in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it. However, Leviticus 25:44-46 says,
"Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly."
Now I don't know what you think support means, but an all-powerful being granting permission for something is at a minimum tacit support. This argument has been done over and over, and I don't need to go any further into this. You have no actual argument here.
There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery, but Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state.
So we can disregard the Old Testament? What can we ignore because it was the accommodation for people's sinful state? And which do we still need to follow?
And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
The Slave Bible is an edited version which excluded or altered passages that might be perceived as promoting ideas of liberation, equality, or rebellion. The intention behind creating such a version was to control and manipulate the beliefs of enslaved individuals, reinforcing a narrative that justified the institution of slavery. The Bible, as a complex and diverse collection of texts, contains various passages that can be interpreted in different ways. While some parts of the Bible have been used to support oppressive systems, other passages emphasize principles of justice, compassion, and liberation. The selective editing of the Slave Bible was a deliberate attempt to suppress the liberating aspects of the biblical message and reinforce a narrative that served the interests of slaveholders. So your point is basically, how can the Bible support one thing with all the glaring inconsistencies in it? I don't think you're making the point you think you're making. So, while this is an answer, it is demonstrably false. No points for you. Still 2 points out of 12 now.
Christianity supported slavery. Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian.
Christianity played a significant role in the abolitionist movements of the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in Western societies. However, it is important to note that the abolition of slavery did not occur universally or simultaneously, and attributing the abolition of slavery solely to Christianity oversimplifies a complex historical process. Christianity also played a significant role in attempts to justify the institution. They pointed to passages in the Bible that seemed to tolerate or regulate slavery, arguing that it was part of God's plan. This pro-slavery stance was particularly prevalent in certain southern states of the United States before the Civil War. The Bible was invoked on both sides of the debate, with abolitionists and defenders of slavery offering different theological perspectives. The diversity of Christian views on slavery highlights the complexity of the relationship between religion and social issues. It is important that we recognize that religious beliefs and interpretations can be influenced by cultural, social, and economic contexts. While Christianity was invoked both in support of and against the abolitionist movement, the ultimate outcome of the abolitionist struggle was shaped by a variety of factors, including moral arguments, changing economic conditions, and evolving societal values. So saying, yeah, we did the slavery thing, but we also stopped doing the slavery thing, doesn't earn you any points. You don't get points for just no longer doing one of the many really harmful things you've done. So this doesn't go against the fact that Christianity and Christians have supported, and some still do, the institution of slavery, especially that which continues in the US. No points for this one, so 2 for 13.
God killed tons of people in the Bible. Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it, especially if people sin.
Agreeing with the argument and glossing over the actual problem is not an answer. I'm not sure this guy understands the argument being made here. That, or he is okay with it because he thinks it's okay for his God to commit immoral acts. Sounds like he's doing that special pleading apologists are famous for. 2 for 14.
Atheist countries are more prosperous. Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity, it's that prosperity causes atheism because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God.
Well, okay. Let's grant that correlation is causation for your argument, but not the atheist's argument. If prosperity causes atheism and not the other way around, what would happen to countries that were atheistic after they have been that way for a while? Would they lose prosperity? Why is it that they continue to be prosperous after becoming more atheist? Why aren't they declining or remaining stagnant? Why doesn't Christianity cause prosperity? As for your point that when people have a more comfortable life, they don't feel the need to depend on God, why is that? Why is it that when people take care of each other and have happy lives, they don't feel a need to depend on a God? Could it be because they're being provided with what they need by their society? Could it be that they can take time to go out and help people, help their economy, or just rest when they need to? Why is it that atheistic societies are better Christian societies than Christian societies? It seems like your God is really dropping the ball here.
But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity.
The argument here is that these secular countries are prosperous because they're rooted in Christianity. Hey, what did you say before?
Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Show your work here. Show your link that shows that Christian roots are the cause of prosperity. But I'll save you some time. In the case of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Germany, their historical development and prosperity are influenced by a range of factors. The historical development of these countries involves a combination of factors such as governance, economic policies, trade conflicts, and geopolitical positioning. Nordic countries in particular are known for their comprehensive welfare systems, high levels of education, and social equality. These policies have contributed to social stability and economic development. Economic policies, including those related to trade, taxation, and industrialization, have played a crucial role in shaping the economic prosperity of these countries. Geographic factors such as natural resources and geographical location can influence economic opportunities and trade. Investments in education, research, and innovation contribute to the development of skilled workforce and a knowledge-based economy. While Christianity has historically influenced the cultural and moral frameworks of these nations, it is important to recognize that these countries have also undergone significant secularization over time. The relationship between religion and prosperity is complex, and many prosperous nations today are characterized by religious diversity or secularism. Additionally, there are prosperous countries with different religious traditions or secular foundations, and countries with Christian roots have experienced periods of economic challenges as well. Causation is challenging to establish in such complex systems, and it's often more accurate to consider a multitude of interacting factors rather than attributing prosperity solely to religious roots. And since he wants to say "what about" in other answers, Japan has a rich cultural and historical heritage rooted in Shinto and Buddhism. Despite limited influence from Abrahamic religions, Japan has developed into one of the world's major economic powers. Singapore is a prosperous and modern city-state with a diverse population practicing various religions, including Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity. The country's success is attributed to its strategic location, economic policies, and efficient governance. South Korea has a strong cultural and historical foundation influenced by Confucianism, Buddhism, and shamanism. While Christianity has grown in influence in recent decades, the country's economic success is often associated with its rapid industrialization and technological advancements. China has a rich history shaped by Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. While it experienced periods of influence from Christianity and Islam, its economic rise in recent decades has been driven by various factors, including economic reforms, globalization, and technological advancements. The UAE is a prosperous Middle Eastern country with a significant Muslim majority. Its prosperity is largely tied to oil wealth, strategic economic planning, and diversification efforts. These examples illustrate that prosperity can be achieved by nations with various religious backgrounds and cultural influences. Economic success is often the result of a combination of factors such as governance, economic policies, education, innovation, and geopolitical positioning, rather than being exclusively tied to a specific religious tradition.
If you want an example of a country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China.
Okay, what am I looking at that is a problem? I can agree that China has its problems, as every single country will. I can grant that it has an issue with human rights concerns, censorship and information control, the status of Taiwan and Hong Kong, environmental issues, trade tensions, the profoundly weird social credit system, and similar economic challenges to the US. So what? Why is China such a bad place when it has the world's second largest economy, which has lifted millions of people out of poverty, a high investment in infrastructure projects, significant space exploration? It is a major global manufacturing hub. It is a leading player in renewable energy production, and many other points. How is the quality of life in China compared to the US? Do you think Zoomer even knows? Do you think he has ever talked to someone who lives in China ever? I have students in Hong Kong and Chengdu currently. They seem to live very modern, very normal lives. A whole bunch of really bad points from him, and it doesn't even address the argument. It just tries to dismiss the actual point. Speaking of, no points for this one. 2 out of 15.
There's 4,000 gods that people believe in, and you're atheist to 3,999 of them. I just go one god further. Okay, this isn't the gotcha that you think it is, because the question of whether some sort of god exists is fundamentally different from the question of which religion is right about God.
He technically said a true statement, but didn't address the argument at all. The point of this is to highlight the perspective that atheists reject belief in all gods, not just the gods of a specific religion. The phrase is a succinct way of expressing the idea that believers and non-believers are similar in that they both disbelieve in many gods. Atheists simply go one step further by also disbelieving in the god of the particular religion being discussed. The purpose of this argument is to encourage critical thinking about religious beliefs, highlighting that everyone, regardless of religious affiliation, holds disbelief in a multitude of gods. It underscores the consistency of an atheist position and challenges the notion that atheism is a rejection of only one specific god rather than a broad skepticism towards all gods. He didn't answer this argument at all. 2 for 16.
If God created everything, then who created God? Well, God is defined as the uncaused causer. Everyone knows there needs to be a first cause at the beginning of the chain of all events in the universe, and it makes a lot more sense for that first cause to be a personal God who caused things for a reason, rather than some random impersonal force.
This argument is so bad. As you may know, the uncaused causer, better known as the unmoved mover argument, posits that there must be a first cause or an unmoved mover to explain the chain of causation in the universe. I don't want to dive too deep into this right now, but I need to touch on the problems as briefly as I can. The unmoved mover argument posits that there must be a first cause or an unmoved mover to explain the chain of causation in the universe. Though, if everything requires a cause, the positioning of an unmoved mover itself raises the question of what caused the unmoved mover. If proponents of the argument exempt the unmoved mover from the requirement of a cause, then they have committed special pleading, a fallacy where the exception is made without justification. The unmoved mover argument assumes a linear cause and effect model of causation. This may be an oversimplification of how causation works, especially at the fundamental level of the universe. Quantum mechanics, for example, introduces probabilistic and nonlinear aspects to causation, challenging the assumption of straightforward chain of causes. The unmoved mover argument concludes that the unmoved mover possesses attributes traditionally associated with God, such as being eternal, immaterial, and powerful. These attributes are not necessarily deduced from the argument itself, but are added based on theological assumptions. This can be seen as an ambiguity, or leap in attributing specific characteristics to the unmoved mover without sufficient justification. The argument assumes a particular understanding of causation, which may not be universally accepted. Causation, especially at the fundamental of reality, may be different from everyday experiences of cause and effect. The argument's reliance on a linear chain of causation may not align with more nuanced views of causation in modern physics and philosophy. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. We cannot investigate beyond the Planck time. So even if we could assert that there was a termination of the infinite regress, you are still nowhere near any kind of justification as to what that cause would be. Your answer was a long torn apart argument, no points, 2 for 17.
Science disproves God.
This is so close to the argument that there is no scientific proof for God that I shouldn't even bother. But I'll check his answer to see if it's different.
Well, actually, the church invented modern science. All the founders of the scientific revolution deeply believed in God, and medieval theologians laid the groundwork for modern science by saying the world was governed by an intelligent creator. That means we can understand the world with our intelligence. And studying God led to studying the world because the world is God's creation.
Wait, what did you say before?
Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yeah, that again. Simply because people did something and also believed in a god does not make everything they did tied to that one belief. According to your book, the first person ever to murder also believed in a god, as did many other murderers. Does that mean that murder is a religious concept too? Does that mean that because they believed in a god, that their belief had an impact on their murdering? You don't get to make these connections, even if the person has a religious quote attempting to tie their religion to their scientific work. And another point on this, during the scientific revolution, explicit atheism as a philosophical or intellectual stance was not as openly discussed or prevalent as it became in later centuries. Many intellectuals of the time were deeply embedded in religious and theological traditions, and the dominant cultural context was influenced by religious institutions. While there may have been individuals who held skeptical or non-religious views during the scientific revolution, the historical record is often less clear about personal religious beliefs due to the social and cultural expectations of the time. Additionally, openly professing atheism could carry serious consequences, including social ostracism or even legal repercussions. When there are repercussions for being an atheist, including removal of funding for scientific research, it is no surprise that most scientists at the time were willing to express some religiosity. However, the Enlightenment period happened shortly after the scientific revolution, and that changed everything. So the response, science doesn't disprove God because a lot of scientists were religious, is not an answer to the argument. So still 2 points out of 18. And that's where I'm going to cut this off for today. not quite halfway done with his responses to 40 atheist arguments, which, fun fact, is not all atheist arguments. Check back next week for part 2. I'll try to get through as many as I can, but this looks like it's gonna be a long one. If you like that I point out the 11% answer rate, hit that like button and show that you approve of me holding this guy accountable. Though you can be part of the 16 out of 18 by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already and take part in holding theists accountable. An extra special thanks to my patrons, Calamious Anima, Longhaired Lefty, Musical Ocelot, Tarek Alkasab, Jamminbomb, Kai Henningsen, and now welcome to Triple Towel. You are all the prosperity that correlates to the secular growth of my channel. If you would like to be part of the best secular nations, you can join them for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/DarkOfAllTrades. Every time I see a new person pop up, it really does make my day. Thank you to all of you. And as always, keep learning.